Could you turn on your camera? And today, Professor Mark will have a lecture with us face by face. So please turn on your camera. And if you have any question about the final reflective paper of personal change plan and any problem about the final exam, you can ask today. Next week, we are going to finish our final exam. So probably this week will be our last lecture. So if you have any question and you want to ask about this question to Professor Mark, you can ask today. And let's welcome to Professor Mark.
Okay. Hello. It's good to see you again. I see two of you anyway. I don't know where the other three are, but I'll assume that there we go. I see one more now. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Yes, we will talk about, I'll be submitting 3 exam questions to your professor for your final exam. And so the first part of this is we're going to review some basic concepts and also review for the final exam. So we'll spend about 15 minutes or so taking a look at that. So let's go to the first slide, please. Good. Thank you. So one of the major topics that we talked about in my lectures, at any rate, was this concept of purpose and meaning. And I'm pretty certain that one of my 3 questions will come from asking you to understand and reflect and to talk a little bit about purpose and meaning. So why is understanding purpose and meaning important? So I have 2 bullets under here. And so if I ask that question on the exam, why is understanding purpose and meaning important? These are 2 ways that purpose and meaning is important. But you can certainly add your own as well. Purpose and meaning we talked about it several different times during the semester. So you can imagine, if you use these first 2 bullets, developing life meaning and purpose provides us some immunity. So what would that immunity be from? That immunity would be from negative thoughts. The immunity would be from boredom. The immunity would be from things like depression and addiction and things of that nature. So developing life meaning and purpose will provide us some immunity. It may not prevent us from ever being depressed or ever having difficulties in our life, but it gives us a beaming light. It's as though it's drawing us toward. So developing meaning and purpose gives us some immunity, but that's just the beginning. You have to understand how it's given us immunity. Also, it provides us understanding and self-care strategies. So as we mentioned earlier in the semester, if we understand why we're doing something, for example, we spent an entire lecture talking about work, the Adlerian task of work. And of course, work can get monotonous and it can get boring at times. But work is something that we need to do to be able to survive. So how do we then give ourselves a sense of being, a sense of positiveness in sometimes boring or difficult circumstances? Well, self-care strategies, ways that we can prevent ourselves from becoming burned out or having illnesses, immune system illnesses and things of this nature, is through purpose and meaning. So that sense of purpose and meaning is very important. You were asked to do an activity very early in the semester on living a life that matters. The whole idea of that exercise was to help to give you purpose and meaning. So purpose and meaning helps us or provides us some immunity, and it gives us some self-care strategies. So if you should get a question like this on the examination, please make sure that you are able to explain the importance of purpose and meaning in terms of healthcare strategies and providing immunity. Another concept that will be a little bit difficult to ask you to ask on an examination, but I've got a question about this that I may consider using. So what are the big questions that support purpose and meaning? I mentioned this probably 2 or 3 times also during the semester, is that these big questions like, who am I in this world? Or what does life mean? Or is there anything beyond this life? These are questions that will come up in our life. Even if we're totally focused on our goals. Let's say our goal is to be the best teacher in the world, to be the best possible teacher, to reach the students, every student that you have. If that's your goal, that's fine. But how does that incorporate into these big questions? What does life mean? Is there anything beyond this life? Who am I in this world? So the big questions support purpose and meaning. So that could be a question for the examination. How does these big questions support purpose and meaning? So I imagine there'll be at least one question on your exam from this particular page. So make sure you understand and review the PowerPoint slides that were related to purpose and meaning. And I think if you can answer that second question, what are the big questions that support purpose and meaning, I think you'll be in pretty good shape for the question or so that will be on the exam based on this. Okay, let's go to the next slide, please. This particular, whoops, what happened here? Okay. This particular lecture on agape love and suffering, we covered a lot of material in that lecture, and I'm not going to go back and take a look at all the different things. But I think the two that are most important in terms of what I would like to see you know is, first of all, what is agape love? And I'm gonna quickly move to the case of Otis. The case of Otis. Otis is 5 months old. He's my grandson, and he was an adopted child at birth. And the story is very interesting on how all this developed. But my daughter, who had difficulty maintaining her pregnancy and had several miscarriages, decided that they were going to adopt a child. Now, I'm an adopted child as well. I was adopted when I was very young, at about 6 months. And my experience in my adoption wasn't all that positive. My parents were very good, well-meaning, loving parents, but they didn't understand my need to understand who I was and where I came from and anything about my birth parents. So in the United States, adoptions are either closed or open. Closed adoptions means that there is no contact, there is no information passed on, and so there's very little knowledge of the birth parents. Open is just the opposite. That means the birth parent may get information about the child may get information about the birth parents, things of this nature. At any rate, the case of Otis, I was there from the very beginning when he was born, and I saw this incredible unconditional love from the parents just envelop, just absolutely overcome. There's never even a question about whether he was a birth child or an adopted child. They just loved him. I just came back from Toronto, Canada yesterday after seeing Otis for a week. Also, Otis lived in our home for 7 weeks. And I saw the parents interacting with Otis on a daily basis. I saw my wife interact with Otis on a daily basis. I interacted with Otis on a daily basis. I was talking to Otis via the phone yesterday after I got back from Toronto. I called my wife and asked how Otis was doing, and she put the phone near Otis so Otis could hear me talk, and he reacted to my voice. So there's this innate connection that happens between people, even if it's not verbal. Otis is not very verbal. He does a lot of baby talk, even at 5 months. So I think he's going to be very verbal. But verbal in terms of understanding each other, I think we do it through a different sort of way, whether it's eye contact, whether it's our facial expressions, or whatever it might be. But the point being, with this child, that love is unconditional. There's nothing that Otis could do for his parents not to love him. Now, as Otis gets older, there may be more conditions put on that love, may be done inadvertently by the parents. I don't think the grandparents, that would be me and my wife, I think we will always unconditionally um, love Otis. Uh, and that's what agape love is. It's unconditional love. There is no condition on how or why you love. You just do. I think pets, whether they be dogs or cats, I think we can have that same feeling of love being unconditional. And I think that's very important to understand. Now, oftentimes, love becomes transactional. I'll love you if you love me. If you do this, I'll love you, that sort of thing. And I think that can be that's very limiting. And so, as we think about love, and agape love, think about the unconditional nature of it. So now, if we understand what agape love is, what does that have to do with suffering? What does that have to do with recovery? What does that have to do with how we live our life? Uh, I think when we get down or have difficulties in our life, if we think about this idea of agape love, I think it will give us an opportunity to be more present and more in touch with other people besides just ourselves. Uh, we cannot be selfish and experience agape love. We have to be very open and giving. So it is rare and extraordinary, but it is possible. And I think it's more possible than we think it is. Um, in the last maybe month or so, I've really tried to experiment about being more present, being more open, being more available in the current moment to people around me. And I got an Uber from the airport or from where I was staying in Toronto with the family of three. I got an Uber, and the Uber driver was from Afghanistan, and my wife always makes a lot of conversation with Uber drivers or taxi cab drivers. She's interested in knowing who they are and what their history is. I remember one time my wife was to pick me up in an Uber, and when I got in the car, the first thing I said to the driver is, "I bet you have a new best friend." My wife's very friendly, she's very open, and she makes conversation. So I decided that I would do the same thing with this ride to the airport yesterday. And in doing so, what I discovered was we have a lot of commonality between the driver and myself. We love our children. He's younger than me. I'm 70, he was 50, but we had a lot of common experiences. And this was in a 30-minute ride from my place to the airport. I was able to make conversation with him, and I found out that he's a veteran. In fact, he helped the United States troops in Afghanistan as a translator. He had gone to a military academy in Afghanistan. So he had a full life that he had to abandon and to leave because of the Taliban. At any rate, I was able to listen to his story, hear him, and I think it was a very helpful conversation. Now, certainly that wasn't agape love, but it was me making myself available to be able to be with and be able to hear a person that was very different than myself, and yet we had this commonality. So the point I'm trying to make, and the next slide I'll talk about this a little bit more, is that if we look towards that agape love, that being interested, being involved, being a part of, I think that can be very helpful. So will there be a question on agape love and suffering? Maybe. It's kind of hard to write a question that's in something so vague, but it would probably be one that you would be able to understand and to be able to respond to. In terms of suffering, I know we talked about suffering. The key point on suffering is just suffering unless we make meaning of the suffering. And so I gave you the case of Marina. That was my first wife. At age 54, she was diagnosed with stage 4 colon cancer, or excuse me, on her 53rd birthday, she was diagnosed with stage 4 colon cancer. And she did not make it to her 55th birthday. She died before her 55th birthday. I use that as an example because to me, that was so obvious that the reason she had 15 good months before she passed away is because she was able to make meaning of the suffering. So she accepted, she discovered the meaning of her suffering, and she moved on. And that sounds fairly simple, but I saw it happen. I've used it myself when I've experienced suffering. What's the meaning of the suffering? How am I going to grow from the suffering, or is the suffering going to create difficulties? I think I mentioned as we develop through the lifespan, the trajectory will be towards uh, life becomes, I think, a little bit more exciting, tolerable, enjoyable. And I think ultimately, as we move towards my age, older age, we can have less regret if we can accept the suffering that we experience, discover the meaning of the suffering, and then be able to move on from the suffering. Pretty important two concepts. Make sure you understand what agape love is, and make sure you understand the relationship between suffering and making meaning of the suffering. Okay? Let's go to the next slide, please. Excellent. Thank you. So I guarantee you there will be a question on social interest. So make sure you know what social interest is, the importance of social interest. And so I gave you on this particular slide some ways of thinking about this. So what is social interest? It's often defined as genuine concern for others, a cooperative approach to life, and striving for a healthy community. So make sure you understand these components to social interest. What's it look like? How does a person show social interest? Social interest is a key concept of Adlerian psychology. And if you got a question along the lines of how do Adlerians define optimal mental health, the response would be high level of social interest. So there's a direct relationship to optimal mental health and social interest. The higher the social interest, the higher the optimal mental health. Low social interest, on the other hand, will create poor life outcomes due to isolation, depression, physical illness, and negative behaviors like addiction. So you might get a question as to what is the significance of what is the significance of high social interest? And you can talk about optimal mental health, but you can also talk about how low social interest makes life much more complicated and difficult and not very fulfilling. Okay, let's look at the next slide, please. And we talked about the 4 C's. And if I was going to give you a question on the examination about the 4 C's, it would be, what are they? What is connection? What is being capable? What is count and what is courage. And also that the 4 C's are termed vital protections. So if I ask the question, how do the 4 C's provide vital protections? How would you answer that? Just a sentence or two. How would you answer that question? How do the 4 C's provide vital protections? Okay, so that's basically your 2 or 3 questions are going to come from these previous 3 slides or 4 slides, 3 slides. And I hope that that gives you at least a way of thinking about some of the material. We covered a lot of stuff in the lectures that I provided, and I'm not going to go back and look for very small minutia. I'm looking for big ideas, big terms. So I think if you have a good feel for what's on the previous slides here, I think you'll be fine with the questions on the examination. Okay. Any questions before? Yeah, thank you. That's yeah. So tonight's lecture, and it will be a fairly short lecture. And then at the end, if you have any specific questions for me about the lecture or about the exam questions or about the assignment, just, we'll answer those at the end. Okay. So one of the lectures we talked about is recovery. And recovery is usually a term that's used when a person is that transitional period from illness to non-illness. For example, if a person has a heart attack, they'll need a period of recovery, getting their heart back to more normal place. In the addiction field, we talk about recovery when a person stops using drugs or alcohol or work or whatever they're addicted to. They move into a recovery stage. And that recovery stage is all about moving towards transcendence in life, away from addiction, and moving more towards who they can be as a person. So this concept of awe, and I'll define awe on the next slide, but I want you to be thinking about this idea of awe in terms of recovery. Does recovery cause awe? In other words, as a person moves away from their addiction, away from the difficulties they've been experiencing in life, does that then create an opportunity for them to experience awe? Or is it just the opposite? When they experience awe, does that cause recovery? So I want to give you an example of the second one. When I was a drug and alcohol counselor, I did this for several years, 5 years, and I would do the modality that we used at the rehabilitation center I worked at was a inpatient, 44 days inpatient. And 44 days of intensive inpatient, a person really changes a lot. Usually at about the 30th day, I would take them, my group members, to an art museum. Now, they weren't too interested in going. Most of them had had very little experience looking at art or being in an art museum. But nonetheless, for some, the experience did indeed change their life, and because it was such there was so much awe that we experienced. So we would go to this art museum, and then the next day in group, and I had them for 2.5 hours every single day, 5 days a week. We would process what they experienced, and I won't say 100%, but I'll probably say about 60% experience some sense of awe. Okay, so keep in mind that I don't think there's an answer to this question. Does recovery cause awe, or does awe cause recovery? But keep that in mind as we now talk about what awe is. So let's go to the next slide, please. Thank you. So I'm going to show you this slide twice. It comes up again in 2 more slides after this. But in this particular slide, the point I'm trying to get you to think about is when if we look at the bullets at the bottom of the slide: gratitude, admiration, elevation, wonder, love. Let me turn this off. Confusion, fear, and dread. I think I'll start with the first bullet. Let's just take a look at that. When we're thinking about what is awe, think of the word awesome. Now, in English, awesome is used way too much. I go to the store and say something, and the clerk, the clerk in their 20 or 30s will say, "Oh, that's awesome." Well, it's probably not awesome. I think that's a misuse of the word. But you get the idea. The connotation of awesome should be something really unusual, really special. Um, my wife and I, over the last few years, have been traveling around the United States quite a bit. And I always choose routes that will give us this awe experience. And it's easy in the United States to find that. Just drive for a day and you'll find all kinds of geographical formations and scenery and just beauty that would be awesome. So nature is one way of attracting us to this concept of awe. It's just amazing to look into the Grand Canyon, or it's amazing to be on the coast and look at the ocean and just imagine how mammoth and large and expansive the ocean is. Sometimes my wife and I will stand at the edge of the Pacific Ocean, say in California, and just imagine traveling clear across that Pacific Ocean to Taiwan. How difficult that must have been for people who did that early on. It's just, you can't describe it. It's so massive. It's so intense. And so massive and intense are kind of words that we can help us to understand what awe is. So think awesome, but also think awful, meaning that sometimes awe comes from really negative experiences. I think the movies are a real good example of this, particularly Hollywood movies, particularly action movies. I think I forgot the series. I can't think of the series now. Anyway, movies were oftentimes give us awe experiences, and part of those experiences are also the scary points, the times where we really feel this intense fear. Now, in a movie, we know it's not real, and yet we still experience it. How about when that happens in real life? Um, I'll give you an example. I came across an older gentleman who was driving his car, and he went off the road and he crashed his car. And I was the car behind him, about maybe 30 seconds behind him. I didn't see him crash, but I saw the aftermath. So I immediately stopped and I ran to his car, and I was full of fear. There was smoke coming from the car. It was pretty intense. And all I wanted to do was to get his door open and get him out of that car. And I did. I did it successfully. Now, he was injured, not terribly injured, but he was injured to the point that he kind of semi-conscious. He didn't know where he was. He didn't know what happened. But I was able to pull him to safety. Now, I wasn't a hero in that moment. I did what most people would have done. And I'm not talking about that to give myself credit for what I did, because again, most people would have done exactly what I did. However, what I want you to understand is how I felt during that moment of just absolute adrenaline flowing to help this individual. Yes, I did think about my own safety a little bit. What happens if it explodes? But there's no way I could have not done that. it was just pushing me to help this individual. And then the feeling afterwards of knowing that I did successfully help him. I think he would have been okay. The car didn't explode or anything of that nature. So I don't think I saved his life, but I did experience this enormous fear that I overcame that fear by action and behavior. I think that's what sports can give us at times. I don't know how many of you are athletes or participate in sports, but in the United States, we generally do from a very small age. And I think those experiences of I don't think I can do this, and then you end up doing it. The fear of overcoming. Or I think about when I was learning how to swim as an 8-year-old child. And the final test is to jump off the high dive into the water and not drown and be able to use what you just learned in your class to be able to survive. Standing on that high dive, very scary, but then actually doing it. That's another experience related to awe. So awe holds similarities with things like gratitude. When we're truly grateful, there's a connection, there's a sense, there's a feeling that's very uh, positive, but also, I think, beyond just a positive feeling. Um, I was talking with a friend of mine after I got back from Toronto yesterday. I hadn't talked to him in a few months. And we really have supported each other through the years. He's about my age. We've known each other since we were probably early 20s. So we've known each other over 50 years. And just talking with him and feeling that connection to him was a sense of gratitude, a gratitude for friendship. Now, I've talked to him in the past, and I don't think I've ever felt that way because I never gave myself an opportunity to feel grateful to this 50-year relationship. And as I'm talking about it, I get goosebumps on my arm. And so sometimes we talk about those goosebump moments. And goosebump moments is an expression of awe. So they can happen through gratitude, admiration. When I see a person do something that I admire, that again will bring goosebumps. Elevation, elevation in how I feel normally. Think about, for me, I really enjoy going to live music concerts. The bigger the concert, the more I enjoy it, it seems. In my world, Bruce Springsteen is probably the best concert that I've ever been to. It was 4 hours of constant being awed by the musician's ability, by the crowd, by the experience. So that elevation, wonder. Uh, I would ask. I was in the Navy for 21 years, and so most of the people I treated for addiction were also sailors. And most sailors have been to sea. That's by definition. If you're a sailor, you go to sea. And being at sea on a Navy ship for 6 months at a time can be a terrible experience, but it also can be an awesome experience. So it can be awful or awesome. But one of the most awesome experiences about being on a ship in the middle of the ocean is going on deck in the middle of the night and looking at the stars. And it's just a matter of wonder, the millions and millions of stars that are just beautiful as can be, amazing scenery, or not scenery, but amazing sight to see the millions and millions of stars, and that creates a sense of wonder. I think that sense of love, particularly early love, I imagine every one of you have experienced at some time in your life how it feels to be in love. Um, my wife and I have been married 15 years, and oftentimes we talk about how it was that first 2 or 3 years, how we could hardly wait to see each other, how we were just totally in love. And love is a form of awe. Now, I love her to this day, and I will probably love her forever, but it won't be that same type of awesome love that existed in the beginning. There'll be glimpses of it in our relationship. The other day, we were talking about this very thing, and she says, "Yeah, there are times where I feel exactly the same as when I first met you," and I think that's really important aspect of love. But again, this is not agape love. This is love for another person. The love we have for our children, the love we have for our parents. Uh, that is also an awesome kind of love, but we have to pay attention to it. Just like the gratitude I have for my friend that I talked to yesterday, I probably don't pay attention to that. It wasn't an awesome moment every time I spoke with him, but it was yesterday, in part because I could respect and appreciate that relationship that we've had all these years. The same with love. Confusion can cause awe in sort of the negative sort of way. So can fear, and so can dread. And particularly when we think about the emotional experience that goes with these. So when we think about what is awe, this is some categories or some ways of thinking about it. So let's go to the next slide, please. I keep trying to change it myself. Okay. So the definition is this: the sensation of being in the presence of something vast that simultaneously transcends one's understanding of the world, a state of being that straddles the boundary of pleasure and fear. So I'm going to give you a couple minutes, and I'm going to time it. So I've got uh, I've got we're going to do 2 minutes, only 2 minutes. But I want each one of you to share with me at the end of that 2 minutes an experience that you have had or an experience you hope to have that's related to awe by this definition. Okay, so I'm gonna step away from the camera, and I'm going to give you a full 2 minutes starting right now to think about an experience that you've had that you consider to be awesome. And I want each one of you to share with me what that is. So we'll start in 2 minutes from now. Looks like about one more minute. Okay. So I'd like each one of you to share just very briefly an experience of awe or any thought that you might have, actually. It just doesn't have to be an experience, but it would be nice if you could share an experience of what it seems to fit this definition of awe. So which one of you would like to go first? You have to unmute your mic. Yep. Go ahead.
Hi, Professor Ma and Professor Xie. I would like to share a screen. Can I?
Yeah, please.
Okay, wait. Okay, I will. Okay, give me a second. I try because I'm not sure how to do it. Okay, can you see it? Photos.
Yes.
Okay. Why I would like to share this is actually one of the assignment of the other course. So actually, the lecturer asked us to go to the nature and use something from the nature to do an artworks. So this is one which is actually I didn't create it, and I found it actually near my house. So when I go near to it, so I can see it seems like a lobster. So it gives me a kind of wow, why is it if I didn't pay attention or focus on it? So actually I might not see that it was amazing to me. So that is the moment that I feel that is awesome. Yeah. And then after that, later on then I need to use some materials to create another thing. So I after I collected all these leaves, and then I try to make animals, and then it's become look like a reindeer to me. So this is something that I feel that is related to all. Thank you.
Okay. Yes, thank you. I really appreciate that example. Who would like to go next? Thank you.
Yes, I can. For me, it's like a trip to the top of the mountain when you can see a very big view. Then you you are under the clouds, yes, and clouds are under you. So it's for me. It was this week in weekends. I was going to the mountains, and it was so terrible because I was in Taiwan and I found the snow in Taiwan, so it was very high. So for me, it was an example of
Excellent. Thank you very much for sharing. Who else would like to go? Who would like to go next? Anybody there? Y'all leave already? Okay, so Anish cannot share. Thank you, Anish. Yeah, I'll read it for you. Go ahead, type it.
Oh, I can talking.
Okay,
He
go ahead.
said, main was when I see